the early days of television, and we had a little black and white television set, and I saw a documentary by some person who'd been in New Guinea, in the highlands of New Guinea, at Mount Hagen, where there was an annual, or there was in those days, an annual dance festival. And I thought, gee, I'd like to have some of those photographs. So I wrote to the BBC and said something like, I'm an Australian artist living in London. About a week later I got a phone call from somebody, and he said he was from the BBC and he thought he might be able to help me. He said he did have some photographs from the documentary that I'd been looking at, but he wouldn't sell them to me as I wanted him to. He said he'd lend them to me. But he introduced himself over the phone, and he said his name was David Attenborough, and would I like to come around for a drink? Well, David wasn't well known in those days. He was just a bloke from the BBC with a name, as far as I was concerned. So my wife and I went round for a drink. It's odd, isn't it, the little things that one remembers. Totally, utterly insignificant things. Why the devil should one remember them? Because we sat down in his lounge room and he said, what would you like to drink? And my wife said she'd have a gin and tonic, and I said, I'll have a whiskey. And so he poured me a small whiskey, and he said, what do you like in it? Meaning, water or soda or whatever. And I said, well, actually, I prefer it neat. And then he looked at me and he said, well, you better have more than that. And he went, I mean, why should I remember that? Anyway, I've kept in touch with David no more than probably half a dozen times in 60 years. But I have rung him only a couple of years ago, I suppose, to congratulate him on his life as well as anything else. But I'd seen a very good documentary on the ABC, an interview with him by Andrew Denton. So I wrote to David and said, I've just seen this interview and I thought it was a very good interview. And David wrote back and said he thought it was the best interview he had ever had. That week, I was having lunch with another artist in a little cafe in Paddington, and Denton was on his own at a table nearby having lunch. And I thought, will I tell him? No, these guys get so well known, you can't just bust into them in their private space. And then he got up to pay his bill, and I thought, damn it, I will tell him. So as he got to the counter to pay his bill, I stopped him and said, I just had a letter from David Attenborough to say that interview was the best interview he had ever had. And Denton threw his arms in the air and he said, that is the best thing you could ever have told me. So I'm glad I told him.